it seems like the NCAA is, I'm sorry, it seems like there's still lots of deals happening in recruiting that aren't necessarily getting, I guess, stuffed out by the NCAA. Just
Right.
what do you kind of view as where that stands right now? I know it's something Dad was talking about too. And then do you feel like we're moving to a place where it will start getting regulated some? Or
Yeah, you hear things, you read things, and I know the NCAA enforcement staff is beefing up. They're adding more staff members to get into investigations and enforcement. And I read and hear all those things and think that's a good thing because I know how we're going about it and how our coaches position NIL. And and again, you have assumptions or you hear things of how others are doing it, and so I'm excited. I hope that things come to fruition with additional enforcement and an investigation of things that you hear or you think are going on. So how optimistic am I? It's just there's a long horizon. There's a lot of federal discussion, right? Hey, is there congressional help and how the commissioners are working together and new NCAA president. That's very much a window that's out there right now that we talk a lot about. I think at the end of the day, we got to focus on what's here and now. And if there's hope that there's some of these off ramps where there's better management of it, I think that's certainly aspirational. But I don't know that you don't anticipate that at this point. You just kind of got to operate with how the current guardrails are or aren't right now.
California's they've got a bill going in where they're trying to basically pay players.
Pay for play,
How close are you watching that situation, and what could that do to change the landscape even more?
Yeah, talk about it a lot. Rather well read on it. As you know, and Commissioner Phillips and our league, are where a lot of those discussions emanate from. But I certainly click and read, all those things and updates that you hear and read of that case specifically. There's a couple others out there, and so the legal governance aspect of college athletics, NCAA. I know I've said it often, but there's never been a more dynamic time. And NIL now is 18 months in. Transfer portal is more than that. But there's been some guardrails, right? The transfer windows that have been put in place, which helps, but it doesn't eliminate or curtail the transfer portal. I think we will see in a couple years. I think it's the 25 class when the current student athletes here all have their bonus COVID year, really, right? You get your super seniors 5th and 6th years, and so once that cohort moves through, my sense is, I think the thought is that there'll be less transfers just because right now you get a lot of grad transfers because they compete 4 or 5 years and they still have a bonus year. Or a Hunter Tyson. I know he obviously didn't transfer, but he could have. There are a lot of Hunter Tysons that did transfer. So when that group goes through that, now they don't have that standing extra year. You're just going to see less volume of transfer, I would assume, and probably more undergraduate transfer, which is more difficult because there's still progress towards degree metrics you have to keep and things like that. Versus a grad transfer is much more straightforward. So it's going to continue to evolve and probably be managed. Are there substantial changes of transfer portal or still going back to where you have to sit a year in residence? I don't expect that, but I hope it finds its level a little bit when you get rid of the extra COVID year student athletes or they exhaust their eligibility, and with these windows, hopefully help manage it.
Graham, do you think federal regulation is a realistic thing when you talk getting into like antitrust and all sorts of complications with all that? I mean, do you think honestly that Congress would ever get involved or some branch like that would do that?
I won't pretend to know the or to guess at the viability of it, the likelihood. But I would tell you right now, with the new Congress installed, that there's concerted effort, there's concerted strategy to really move that forward. It's been talked about a lot over the past couple of years of federal intervention and preemption amongst the state laws. The general sense from the industry is if there ever is a window to move something forward, is now. And so I know that a lot of the commissioners are working together to kind of have a unified voice to Congress. In addition to the new president, Charlie Baker of the NCAA, to really try to move now with a newly installed Congress. There's no midterm elections this fall, so now feels like there's a really good window to do that. If that moves forward or takes root or gets headway, not sure, but there's certainly significant effort right now with that.
I know Dabo's been on record several times of saying he thinks eventually everything's going to be one conference and everything's coming together. It's been a while since we've talked to you. Has there been any changes or any progress or any of the conference realignment type of stuff?
There's been a lot of continued work within the ACC. We have ACC winter meetings next week, actually, in Charlotte. And we'll have a lot of discussion on how to close the revenue gap, so to speak, for the ACC. Commissioner Phillips has been really transparent and open about excuse me, recognizing the gap and what we can do. There's been discussion on revenue model change, right? Unequal distribution right now. Every 14 and Notre Dame's slice of the pie is a little different inherently. Same slice of the pie. Hey, does that get changed based on performance, brand value, football? So that conversation, that task has certainly increased in discussion. We're going to talk about that a lot next week. And I'm optimistic that gets to a point where there's a changed revenue model within the ACC. Obviously, CFP expansion is a big part of that. That starts in 2 seasons, season after next. It's wild to think. And the influx of dollars there that go from the CFP and will go to conferences and schools to conferences. So the financial management from a landscape standpoint, and specifically the ACC, is significant conversations continue. I'm going to continue to do, my job and look out for Clemson, which is what I know I've said that off and on over the past year, the past 6 months. And so, have continued to be well-read and well-connected from a landscape standpoint, as is President Clements and our board. It's really important that we stay in alignment of current status and opportunities and condition. And so that's continued for sure.
Commissioner Phillips' name keeps coming up at the Big Ten opening. I know he can't say everything to y'all, but what has he said to y'all, and what's been the communication with him on his name being brought up with that job?
Yeah, he hasn't at least formally addressed it with us, and nor have we formally asked. And I think that's just it's athletic directors, coaches. You all well know, addressing headlines, rumors, discussions, candidate lists. You just don't. It has been very appropriate that we just haven't formally discussed that. Now, would absolutely assume and think so highly of Commissioner Phillips, and obviously has Big Ten ties and Chicago ties, so he's a natural name that would make sense, and so it's not surprising. But I'm sure how that evolves. If and when there's a right time, he'll address it with us one way or the other, but hasn't yet, and it hasn't been needed to yet.
So based on what you know and maybe your conversations with other ADs and administrators, is there a lot of support for your split of the pie sort of being more based on performance and things like that?
I think right, well phrased. I think there has been growing understanding within the ACC for us to look at the revenue distribution differently. Now everybody has their hat or their your polo on in different schools based on kind of where you invest or what your priorities are, probably what your appetite is. But I think everybody is at the table to eat. I don't know if this is the right analogy or not. Everyone's at the table and understands that it's time to order. I don't know, different appetite levels based on school. So I've been pleased and optimistic about just the general understanding within the league that, hey, this is something that we really need to look at. And that's not easy. And I emphasize that because don't take it lightly, because forever, the ACC, let alone all other conferences that I'm aware of, it's been equal revenue share. And so the notion of kind of jumping the ditch or really considering rolling up the sleeves on, hey, we need to look at this differently, I think there's really good understanding of that. Now, again, the order of magnitude and how it comes to fruition, that's kind of, that's the next lap.
How many, other ADs or administrators at other schools have you talked to specifically about that?
Yeah, probably all of them. And we certainly talk about it formally when we get together, whether that's next week or when we have our calls. But more your question, I think, kind of offline or kind of one-offs. It's a heavy topic, and I'm certainly Clemson is certainly very bold. Presidents, I know have discussed it, and so Jim and I talk about it a lot, and we try to further it. We certainly have our lens at Clemson about how some of that should work. So I'm certainly have been pushy and very much trying to drive that task. But again, it's top of mind and it's very present for everybody.
What incentive would say like a Georgia Tech have to do that? And is it hoping just that it keeps the conference, gets enough incentive would be, hey, you're still a part of the ACC and the conference is still overall good?
Yeah, I think, Matt, there's some aspect of stability with it. Yeah, I think that's a fair that's a fair take of it. But I think where the understanding is that distribution should be constructed in a way that it incentivizes success. And by way of that, there's some relationship to investment. And so it's not just, hey, Clemson or Florida State or Miami, because you're big brands, you're going to get more slice of the pie. It's not that rudimentary, and that's not my lens either. But it should be based on performance. Football success, postseason, CFP, how you help drive television viewership and metrics and things like that. And so Georgia Tech, your example, their recent history probably wouldn't warrant that level of success and therefore that level of distribution. But you have the opportunity to control it, and hey, let's invest, let's make good decisions and coaches, and success breed. Wake Forest is a great example that we talk about a lot. They are small enrollment, private, different type of school, but how they've performed, and they've invested in coach retention and facilities, and so they're a great example of investment breeds success, which in theory would breed distribution. That's the kind of the sequence of which we discuss.
Going back to the wellness center, when did conversations first start about adding it, and why do you feel like you guys needed something like that?
Yeah, for as much as we've moved, and certainly Dan is the vision for this over the past decade, the facility investment, and we've touched all 21 of 2 new sports now, 21 sports have had investment in their facilities, and a lot of it's we're now rather distributed, where operations facilities, every team has an operations facility by and large, and so the opportunity for Jervy, but this Performance and Wellness Center, which is the core of which 18 of our 21 sports, Olympic sports, will use, it's just a really impactful project. When you do a soccer operations project for $8 million, impactful for men's and women's soccer, but it's 2 sports and it's 60 student athletes. And when you do tennis, a $12.5 million tennis facility, 2 sports, 15 student athletes, really impactful, really important. And we've done a lot of that. We'll continue to do it. But this facility will impact 400 student athletes, 18 sports, and it's a daily or weekly, again, strength and conditioning, sports medicine, nutrition, it's on the path of travel. They'll be there, we can recruit to it. So right now, again, Jervy and those facilities, it's probably, I don't know that it's been a headwind from a recruiting or a facility standpoint, but it's probably, hasn't been something we've really promoted from a recruiting trail, just with where that current facility is. And so now this will jump us into a recruiting advantage for those important areas, more and more so. Yeah, the operations, locker room, lounge, practice facility, really important. That's day to day. We've invested significantly here. This is a core facility that touches 18 sports. That's really, really impactful.
Can you speak to your role just as far as bringing in or helping bring in Garrett Riley, and kind of how you feel like that'll help the football program get back to obviously where you want to see it?
Yeah. I know it was a really quick turn. Was just really pleased and supportive of Coach Sweeney and in that transition, and certainly the off-season discussions. And I know I have said and will say, and it's probably AD 101 of how we'll get into off-season discussions, whether that's contract or whatever, at the end of the season, whatever sport that may be. Right. And that will continue to be how we do it. And so with football, the conversations that Coach and I had in December and in January, so pre and post, Orange Bowl, we started diving into, all things football off-season, staffing, facility needs, NIL, so natural timing of that. But it wasn't until after the national championship game, and I know Coach, I think, spoke on this a couple days ago, where the Garrett Riley opportunity became real. And so, but was very sensitive and very, very tight for that dialogue. And I know, was really pleased, and Coach and Garrett were really pleased with how it came out, because it was a quick transition with Brandon Streeter, and then a quick turnaround to approve the hire. So, and that was very much by design. And it doesn't always work that way. And so I was really, I'm really proud in support of Coach on the decision, his decision, no question. But the execution of it, so to speak, not only on Clemson's behalf and what my role would have to be in that, on Coach and the football program in that role, and then Garrett, and TCU, and how those conversations, it's so easy for things to get out of sequence, and that causes issues or confusions or stops things. Like this one just really lined up so well on all things. It was such a quick turn. And I think it was well received locally, internally, locally, and nationally in some regard, which isn't why you do it, but I think that was certainly the retrospect on it.
I know Dabo said that he kind of took a step back after the Orange Bowl, and
Yeah.
I was like, man, we've got to score more points. Did y'all have any conversations after the season?
Yeah.
When y'all were talking about that kind
Yeah,
of stuff too?
yeah. But just I think that's where just the perception of how that works. Like it's just like all coaches like have that and I view it my role to give space to just for that self-evaluation, particularly for Coach Sweeney, who's won 2 national championships and where the program's at. So yeah, that very much like we talked on that, and he shared not per se of he just shared, hey, where he's at and where some of the things he was thinking, and hey, if we can have this, get this done with Garrett Riley, holy cow, then want to do that. So I know. Listen, the change for offense coordinator is a transactional. It's a personnel change, but I know it. The notion of that change from coach is emblematic on a lot of different things, right? As far as where his expectations are for the program. He said it time and time again. It sounds rhetoric, but it's real. Of his no one has higher expectations of the program than him, and most all coaches would say that. So I think really excited and pleased with just like where his expectations are of himself and the program, and again you see public manifestations of that coordinator change, and then I think within the building and just programmatically day to day this off season and then into the fall. That's certainly the mindset, which is exciting. I know it's been a jolt of energy.
Were there any facility things he mentioned that y'all are working on? Are there any new changes football?
Yeah, we're going to look at a couple things. Certainly, we just opened the cab, and we're also under construction on. Earlier in the fall, we opened the 100 Yards of Wellness, right, Sportsman, which is a lot of what the design and use of that is what we'll see in the Performance and Wellness Center. Which was a $6 million investment. This cab and some of the associated areas with Poe in and around the indoor facilities, about $6 million. So those are certainly just under completion. We need to look at some locker room renovation as well at Reeves coming up. We're going to do some work at the indoor facility, maybe change the turf, video boards, things like that. Haven't touched a whole lot of the indoor facility in 10 years. Not because it hasn't necessarily needed it. We've done graphics and things, but turf and video board, things like that, we'll look at. But then let alone, obviously, the work at the stadium, and Tiger Walk's an important thing, and that's important for IPTAY, tailgating, and that experience, game day experience, but from a football team standpoint too, the team and recruiting, and so the prominence of Tiger Walk's really important, and then the whole bottom level of the West End Zone, which is game day locker room. There's going to be a new tunnel cut, right, that's coming out right behind the goalpost on the west side of the stadium, coming out from the tunnel. Team's still going to ride the buses and go down the hill, but from going in and out kind of at half times and end of the game, there'll be a new tunnel there because that's coming into a new locker room in the bottom level of the West End Zone. And so some updates for recruiting and sports medicine area on game days is part of it too. So those are all under construction, recently completed, under construction. And then, I ticked off a couple things that we're still, that's kind of what's next. Yeah.
So when you hear, Dabo's come out a few times and talk to fans about, keeping things in perspective, but obviously the expectations have changed. You guys are obviously paying him accordingly, and just where do you sort of stand on that? And when in your mind, where this program is right now, what do you think when you think of expectations for the football program?
Yeah, it's because you do have to take a step and a half back sometimes, and quite honestly, we just had some candid conversation with our trustees about just the recognition and appreciation of where our football program is at today, let alone how that's been built over the past 12 years with Coach Sweeney. It's in the 110 years before that of Clemson football, and so that the recognition and appreciation of what's been built is significant. And I know, and Coach obviously spoke on that a lot, and I think that's important for us all to continue to have that in perspective. But the windshield mentality, which Coach talks about often, gosh, he starts every team meeting. I can see the slide with a picture of the windshield and the rearview mirror and the right. You guys seen it? To square it and to maybe answer your question of how am I at, like there is that balance or the excitement, I guess, that comes from the appreciation and the recognition that, hey, we have to know where we've come and what Coach has built, and always have perspective on that, but also know that what's ahead and how we're investing in facilities, staff changes. Games continue to change, sure, from an industry standpoint, not scheme per se, but NIL and transfer portal, and how the windshield of what's next. And I know that's where Coach has an awesome balance of just as a person, let alone how he leads the program, of the appreciation and the tradition of what's been built, but not resting on that because the windshield mentality. And so I know just the balance of those perspectives, or those looking in the rear view versus looking through the windshield, is something that it's always good to sit and have conversations, or just kind of appreciate both ways you look.